Jersey media, if you just mention them, what's your take on them? Are they, in your opinion, good professional journalists that report the news fairly and accurately, objectively, or do you, like myself, believe they're state-controlled?
Well, if you go down to individual presenters and journalists, there were a few that I met who I had a high regard for, who I felt whenever they were talking to me and interviewing me, were giving me a fair crack of the whip and were actually listening. But when you get to the editorial level and you get to the policy level, there is no doubt that they jumped on board with those who were trying to denigrate the abuse survivors and who were trying to discredit the whole investigation. Not to discredit the investigation because they had any dislike for the police or ourselves, but purely because that was what their political masters wanted. They wanted the abuse survivors discredited. They wanted the evidence and the stories that they were telling about the abuse that they suffered. They wanted that discredited. And so they went along with it, and they jumped into bed with some very strange bedfellows during their efforts to do that. I mean, for instance, you know, they were taking stories from and sharing stories with, as indeed were states members, leaking emails to journalists who had made a career out of supporting convicted paedophiles and who had made a career out of discrediting abuse victims and survivors. For instance, by writing books and giving evidence to parliamentary select committees in support of people like the Leicestershire care rapist Frank Beck, and alleging that the North Wales care home abuse had never ever occurred, but it was all a conspiracy between so-called victims, as they put it, and the police to get compensation and to put innocent people away. So they did the victims no favours whatsoever. They launched a fairly vicious campaign against the abuse victims, and to get at the abuse survivor victims, they of course came through Graham Power and myself by discrediting the investigation. But in reality, what they were doing was trying to persuade the public that the abuse that the victims had said they suffered was all a figment of their imagination.
Yeah, so we seem to be talking a lot about the investigation and everything now, rather than the abuse that took place. Do you think that was orchestrated by the media or by their masters to talk about the investigation rather than the abuse?
Well, I think that I don't think the media would have been capable of instigating that on their own. That came from their political masters, and I use political with a small p because for a start, I don't think for 1 minute that it was politicians who were driving the agenda, or elected politicians, should I say, that were driving the agenda. So I think that the media were just simply doing as they were told, and they were launching this campaign, which the only way they could do it, the only way they could discredit what the victims were alleging was to discredit the investigation that was supporting the evidence of the victims.
Well, that brings me on to the power structure in Jersey. Who do you think, who do you believe are the real power and influence in Jersey? Is it the politicians?
No, it's not the politicians, absolutely not. And this probably explains why there are so few, however, a lot of politicians in Jersey would feel out of depth in a parish council in the United Kingdom. With a few notable exceptions, I have to say. But the politicians are not the power base. Politicians do as they're told, and to look at the real power in Jersey and the people that cause the most fear in Jersey, you have to look at the upper echelons of the legal establishment, in particular in the law officers department. That is where the real power lay. The very fact that their position in Jersey society, and the fact that they've also got a foothold in the States, allowed them to wield the real power. And you could see their influence everywhere, and everything I tried to do in the abuse inquiry, no matter whether it was to do with politicians or policy, the law officers department were always in there as an obstruction. And no matter whether there were good people within that law officers department, they rose in every single problem that I had in Jersey. Going back to the abuse inquiry, there were lawyers working there who had views that the abuse was widespread, and that they were driving me behind the scenes and telling me what was going on. But when it came to the crunch, their jobs were being threatened. And in one instance, away from the abuse inquiry, where a young member who was working for the law officers department was a victim of a severe sexual harassment campaign, and she went to a lawyer working within the establishment who tried to support her, but was then threatened not only with her job but also with her husband's job. That was resolved whenever they looked around to find somewhere where they could send this female to work where she wouldn't be subjected to harassment. And they actually sent her to work for us, which seems to show some disparity with what Ian Lamarcon was saying about the bullying culture within the States. She came to work for us as a civilian and felt so comfortable and enjoyed it so much, she actually joined the police, and as far as I'm aware, she's still serving as a police officer. So, no matter where you looked, the influence of the law officers department was there, whether it was trying to put in lawyers within our office who were allegedly specialist child abuse lawyers, but turned out in fact to be lawyers with no experience of child abuse, who just happened to work for a company that had very close links to the law office department, and whose office, whose chambers had won millions of pounds worth of contracts in Jersey. So everywhere you turn, the law officer's influence was there.
So you would say the most powerful influence in Jersey is the law officers?
Without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt. As I say, no matter what I was dealing with, no matter whether it was abuse inquiry, whether it was a firearms scandal, whether it was police corruption, the law officers department were there in every aspect of what we were trying to do.
I'd like to finish up by thanking you for giving us this interview, to taking the time out, for staying with all this. Could I finish this on what message would you, or have you got, for the abuse survivors and victims of the state-controlled child abuse?
From day one, whenever the victims and survivors, and I hope profoundly that they don't, I know that some of them don't like the term victims, but I think you have to understand where I'm coming from, police officer background, and people who are victims of crime, we slip back into this habit of calling them victims. So I don't mean any slur on them by that, because from day one, since they started to tell us the horrific stories of what they had encountered, I've had nothing but the utmost respect for all of those victims. The vast majority of them went through terrible treatment. Their courage and their dignity stands in stark contrast to the, I think it was your colleague Rico who called them the foot-stomping lackeys whose disgraceful behaviour in the States whenever child abuse is mentioned, as if they're terribly bored with it all, where they stamp their feet. The courage and the dignity of the victims has stood out head and shoulders above all else. My one regret is that we didn't get them the justice that we hoped we would. I know they've said that we never promised them, but I was very hopeful that we did, that we would get the justice at the outset. What I didn't allow for was the lengths that some within the Jersey establishment would go to try and prevent that justice from being obtained. I'm sure that one day all of the facts will get a wider circulation in the public domain, because they are there at the moment through the efforts of yourselves and one or two other people. The facts are there for people to see if they know where to look for them. And I'm sure one day that the victims will get the justice they deserve. But, for me, the overriding impression that I'm left with is that the people who have suffered so much, the courage and the dignity that they have shown is in marked contrast to some others on the island.
Thanks for that, Mr. Harper, and hopefully we can do this sometime again.
Absolutely, no problem.
Thanks very much.